Chapter 26: Sovereignty and Self-Respect. Self-respect is often spoken about as a feeling. People describe it as confidence, pride, a sense of worth. They imagine it as something that rises when circumstances are good and falls when circumstances are hard. In practice, self-respect behaves less like emotion and more like jurisdiction. It is the degree to which you experience yourself as governed from within rather than governed by what happens to you, by what others want from you, by what your moods demand in the moment. It is not a warm internal glow, it is a quiet structure. Sovereignty is the name for that structure. To speak of sovereignty is to speak of the mind as territory and attention as the means by which that territory is governed. A sovereign person does not control every weather pattern inside them. They are not immune to anger, anxiety, desire, or fatigue. What distinguishes them is that these states do not automatically become policy. The person can feel turbulence without surrendering authority to it. They can be affected without being ruled. This is the practical meaning of emotional discipline. Discipline here is not severity. It is not denial. It is not a performance of being unbothered. It is the maintenance of agency under pressure. Agency is not the ability to feel nothing. It is the ability to decide what you do while feeling something. When this ability is stable, the person experiences an inner solidity that is difficult to fake. They begin trusting their own commitments. They begin taking themselves seriously, not in a grandiose way, but in the simplest way. When they say they will do something, they do it. When they say they will not do something, they do not. Their behavior becomes a credible expression of their standards rather than a negotiation with their mood. Credibility is the root of self-respect. Many people want to respect themselves without building anything that deserves respect. They seek the feeling first. They try to think their way into confidence. They try to affirm their worth. None of these approaches works for long because the mind does not accept arguments about identity. It accepts evidence. Evidence is created by behavior over time. Emotional discipline is the behavior that creates evidence because it prevents the most common form of self-betrayal, obedience to impulse at the expense of values. Self-betrayal is rarely dramatic. It is often small and habitual. It is the promise made to oneself and quietly broken. It is the standard that exists in principle but collapses under fatigue. It is the decision to speak carefully and then speaking sharply because the moment felt hot. It is the intention to do meaningful work and then disappearing into distraction because discomfort appeared. These are not moral failures. They are moments where sovereignty is relinquished. The person may not notice it consciously, but the mind records it. The mind learns, my standards are optional. My intentions are negotiable. I do not lead myself. That learning is corrosive. It creates a subtle internal contempt, not always felt as contempt, but as fragility. The person becomes less willing to commit because they do not trust themselves to follow through. They become reactive to criticism because it touches a nerve that already exists. They become hungry for reassurance because their internal authority is weak. They may appear functional, even successful, yet inside they feel oddly ungrounded. They feel as though their life is being carried by circumstances rather than being directed. Sovereignty repairs this by making inner authority real. Inner authority is not an idea, it is a pattern. It is the repeated experience of yourself choosing what is right for you over what is immediately relieving. Relief is not the enemy. Immediate relief becomes the enemy when it is purchased with long-term erosion. Many impulsive behaviors are attempts to regulate discomfort quickly. They work briefly, and then they cost. The cost shows up as guilt, as lost time, as damaged relationships, as diminished confidence. The person then feels worse and reaches for more relief. The cycle continues. Sovereignty breaks the cycle by making short-term relief subordinate to long-term integrity. Integrity is the currency of self-respect. Integrity is not perfection. It is coherence between your stated values and your enacted behavior. Emotional discipline creates this coherence because it reduces the distance between intention and action. It stops mood from becoming the final authority. A person who can act without emotional permission begins living with fewer internal contradictions. They may still struggle, they may still hesitate, yet their overall pattern becomes credible. They do not spend their life making promises to themselves they cannot keep. They stop living in the gap between who they say they are and what they actually do. That gap is where shame grows. Shame is often understood as a response to external judgment. It is frequently a response to internal inconsistency. A person knows what they value. They know what they said they would do. They know the standards they claim. When their behavior repeatedly violates those standards, they begin experiencing a quiet self-disgust. They might mask it with humor, with cynicism, with busyness. They might avoid stillness because stillness lets the truth be felt. The mind is not stupid. It knows whether it is being led or not. The strongest form of self-respect is simply being led by yourself. Being led by yourself does not mean being rigid. It means having a center that does not collapse under emotion. It means being able to say no without resentment. It means being able to tolerate discomfort without converting it into blame. It means being able to keep a promise even when the moment offers excuses. These are small acts. Over time, they produce a stronger sense of self because the self becomes less theoretical. It becomes a lived pattern, something the mind can point to without needing to fantasize. This is why sovereignty changes how you relate to other people. A person without internal sovereignty often tries to borrow it from the outside. They seek authority through approval, through status, through control of others, through being needed. They may become overly agreeable because they cannot tolerate disapproval. They may become overly combative because they cannot feel small. They may become overly accommodating because they fear abandonment. These are not merely interpersonal styles, they are attempts to stabilize an inner world that does not feel governed. When the inner world is governed, these compulsions weaken. The person does not need to win every conversation. They do not need to control others to feel safe. They do not need constant affirmation to feel worthy. They can hear criticism without collapsing because their self-respect is built on behavior rather than on image. They can tolerate misunderstanding without panic because they do not require immediate validation to remain intact. This does not make them indifferent, it makes them steadier. Their relationships become less transactional because they are no longer using other people as regulators. Sovereignty also changes what you tolerate. A person with weak self-respect often tolerates situations they know are damaging because they do not feel worthy of better. Or they tolerate because leaving would require confronting discomfort they cannot handle. They stay in jobs that erode them, friendships that drain them, patterns that weaken them, because changing would require sustained inner governance. They may blame circumstances, yet often the deeper issue is that their attention is not under their control. They are pulled by fear, by habit, by immediate relief. Sovereignty is what makes change possible because it gives a person the ability to endure the short-term discomfort of altering a pattern. This is where self-respect becomes practical rather than psychological. It appears as boundaries that are actually enforced, not just admired. It appears as standards that are actually maintained, not just stated. It appears as quiet consistency. The person stops negotiating with themselves endlessly. They do not need to be dramatic about discipline. They do not need to announce their values. Their values become visible through what they do. Visibility to yourself is what matters most. A person can appear disciplined to others while privately living in chaos. They can appear calm while internally rehearsing and bracing. They can appear confident while secretly doubting every promise they make. Self-respect is not public image. It is the private knowledge that you are not lying to yourself. It is the ability to look at your own life without flinching, not because it is perfect, but because it is coherent. Coherence is a rare form of peace. It is not the peace of comfort, it is the peace of not being at war with your own mind. Emotional discipline produces this peace by reducing internal conflict. Internal conflict does not disappear, but it changes character. It becomes a normal tension between impulses and values rather than a chronic collapse of values under impulses. The person learns that wanting something does not mean doing it. Feeling something does not mean expressing it. Being triggered does not mean being justified in reacting. These distinctions are the legal system of the inner world. A sovereign person has an inner law that is simple and enforced. The law is not moralistic, it is functional. It says feelings are allowed, behavior is chosen. This is the foundation on which self-respect rests. Without it, a person is governed by their most immediate state. With it, a person becomes capable of being the same person in varied conditions. They can be tired and still be honest. They can be angry and still be fair. They can be anxious and still act cleanly. This consistency produces something that looks like strength from the outside. From the inside, it feels more like stability. Stability is the sense that your life is not constantly being pulled off course by your own turbulence. It is the sense that you can trust your decisions because they are not made in panic. It is the sense that you can make commitments without quietly doubting that you will abandon them later. It is the sense that you are not at the mercy of the moment. This is what people reach for when they seek self-respect. They are often reaching for sovereignty, even if they do not name it. Sovereignty does not make you invulnerable. It makes you less governable by what is not you. The world will still demand, people will still disappoint, stress will still arrive. The difference is that these events do not automatically write the policy of your day. You retain the ability to choose your posture, your timing, your language, your next action. You remain the author of your behavior, even when you are not the author of your circumstances. That is the strongest form of self-respect available to a human being, the experience of being led from within.